Today we've got Ben. Hi Ben, how are you?
Doing well, Chris. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. And we're going to be speaking about tracking and improving developer experience. I guess first of all, like why is that important? Why did you pick this as a topic? And kind of just kick us off with kind of what that overall sort of like means to you guys as an organization.
Sure. Well, I chose this as a topic because it's something that we've been working on pretty intensely for the past 3 years or so. COVID in 2020 really shook things up on our team. We went from an in-office organization to a fully distributed organization. Everything that was involved with the pandemic. Obviously, lots of big feels and life changes for everyone around the world. We mostly, though, saw. Let's see how to describe this. There was a big. All of the major changes that were happening in our team, I think, were not being addressed, or were not being uh, reckoned with, I guess. And we were sort of struggling to catch up with all of this. We saw some turnover in 2020 and 2021. And so in 2021, I stepped back and said, all right, the nature of the company has changed. The nature of the team has definitely changed. We need to be doing something to address that and to make sure that the current team that's still here, as well as people that we're bringing in to replace people that have left, are feeling comfortable and safe here on this team. And I was sort of like at a loss as to how to do that without, other than just one-on-ones. So I did some research. DevX is not, a new topic, so there's a lot of good content out there, and a lot of cool people to talk to about it. And really what I was looking for was like the best things to be measuring, the best tool to measure those things with, and the best sort of process to measure them in order to see results and to get people to be, not get people, to hopefully change things so that people start to have a more positive view of the team and the culture. So yeah, it was a super big issue, an important issue for us to tackle then. And yeah, I think we've come a long way since then. We started implementing quarterly developer experience surveys using a tool called DX. And we've used those results every quarter to focus internal process improvements, and have seen a lot of uptick in sentiment scores and just like people expressing confidence and their comfort on the team and one-on-ones and stuff. So it's been a great experience.
Great. No pun intended, obviously. It's one of those you say that it's quite widely talked about, not a new thing. I see it a lot from like companies that have tools for developers and things like that, that they'll have like a developer experience advocate or something like that for people
Mm-hmm.
working with their software. I don't see people shouting about it all the time as to the developer experience of their own internal team. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of that time that almost comes down to like HR look after that and they just make sure that they're happy and have the right PTO and the right salary and stuff like that,
Yeah.
not necessarily actually looking after the engineers themselves from like an engineering point of view. So it's really interesting. You say that there's a lot out there, and it'd be great to grab some of the links and stuff like that to share alongside this. But I guess where did you start? You basically at a point where you're like, it's not great.
Right.
Like, did you have like an end goal in mind? I'm assuming this is like an ever evolving thing and it will never be like fully finished, but did you have it's currently here and I want it to get it to here, or did you not even really know where it was at to start with?
Well, I certainly didn't know in any quantifiable way where we're at. And I was also like, I don't even know how to quantify something like experience because that's, it's very just vibes.
Yeah, you're
And
like,
so,
you good?
and
Like, cool, see you next
yeah,
week.
exactly. Like it literally was just one-on-ones, and having some sort of like general check-in with our team as a whole every month. Um, but yeah, I guess when I say like there's lots of stuff out there, lots of people are talking about it, that's coming from a place of I was out searching for it because I
Yeah.
was like, oh, I want to improve my developer experience. So obviously there's going to be a lot of like articles and stuff on that. It might not be the most popular topic, and certainly is probably overshadowed by like conversations around developer productivity, I would say. But developer experience, I think there's some big names big in this arena. I would say right now, especially DX. Abby Noda's a big person, a big voice in the industry that I follow. He's also the CEO of DX, so that kind of goes hand in hand. But I think also like, gosh, what are the books? Like the psychology of computer programming, I think was written in the 70s. And also if you look at like extreme programming explained, like these talk about developer experience, not directly necessarily, but in ways that are like, here are processes that you can use to make your workflow more efficient and your day-to-day job just easier for you. And really that's kind of what I was looking for when I went searching was, all right, clearly there's something that is disrupting my team in a way that they don't want to stay. And I have to identify what those things are, but then I also have to figure out a way to improve them. And it turns out a lot of it was things that are related to the developer workflow. So it was, people talk around DevX, I think, a lot by talking about like improving specific parts of the development lifecycle. And they don't even necessarily know that they are talking about developer experience.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the things that you said, if someone leaves, you assume it's because of, like, in your instance, yourself, or like the company, or like
Right.
like a change in leadership, or like
Right.
that they've got a better salary. Don't necessarily think it's so much about like the granulars of how their job works on like a day-to-day basis.
Right.
So there must be so many organizations where people could be like not even tempted to look for work because that some of those gripes can be like got rid of before it even
Mhm.
gets to that stage, which is really important. And I think particularly in a world where, like, I speak to people every day, like maximum people really want to do is hybrid, then, and like I feel like that's almost more complicated sometimes than actual remote work. Like
Mhm.
trying to, if you've ever tried to be on a meeting where you've got three of you in the room and three of you on separate like video calls, it's an absolute nightmare. And I'm sure VR or something will sort that out one day. But like remote and hybrid working like makes all of this stuff more important, to make sure you're on top of. But I think the thing that you said before around, if you're not I don't know who actually like has this thing, but if you're not tracking something, you can't then notice if you're improving it.
Mhm.
So I guess that was the place to start, right? So how did you sort of track what you were doing?
Sure. So, like I mentioned, we use the DX tool. It's a Slack integrated web tool that takes I don't know how many sentiment areas, but basically it has extracted a bunch of areas of or like topics that go out as a survey every 3 months, and it's done on the web portal or over Slack, so it really like meets the developer where they are, whatever they're most comfortable. And then you can over time like identify areas that need more attention and sort of focus those questions more on those areas, which is really cool. The nice thing about it that I thought was great when I signed up was that it talks about parts of the software development lifecycle, and like also the developer's just general workday. So there's things like focus, like how much focus time do you get every day, or I think it's phrased as like I'm able to focus for 3 to 4 hours a day or something like that. So that's like related to bless you related to the development life cycle, but it's not necessarily like a specific part of it. But obviously, if you're getting interrupted a lot, that's going to break up your routine and your flow, and that's not going to be a good developer experience. But the cooler parts was like how granular it got within the development lifecycle. So there's things like deployment, build time, like test coverage, documentation, application setup, just things that I was hearing from my team sort of piecemeal, and and things that people were complaining about or even praising for different projects. And now all of that data is in one place, and I can compare individual people's scores against each other for like, oh, this person has no problem with application setup, and this person scores it very low every time. Like, what am I learning, or what is this person that's getting it right every time, or having an easier time with it? What are they doing that this other person's not, that I can like extract and maybe apply to the entire team? So it's not to just be a pitch for the DX tool. I'm sure there's lots of other great tools out there that do similar things, but the main points that I think this tool actually really captures well are the continuity, the Slack integration, and the ability to have follow-ups. So it really frames the data in a way that makes it easier for me as a manager to extract insight and then use those insights to inform future team meetings.
For sure. And when you went into DX originally, is it kind of like a blanket, like one size fits all, or did you have to go in and kind of pick the things specifically that you wanted to quiz your engineers about?
I think it's a great question. 3 years ago feels like so long. I think from what I remember, there is like a turnkey option where you can just it will do like its most relevant areas, and you can just like set it and forget it. That's not how they encourage you to use it, because there are a lot of options within its different topics, and you're encouraged to get in there, explore, and pick and choose the questions that are most relevant to your team, which I found very useful because, we're an agency, we're not a product team, so we have lots of different types of applications that our devs work on, and our devs work on multiple projects, every month. So the problems that we were facing were very rarely consistent across all applications and across all developers. So the ability to get in there and sort of fine tune the questions, choose, 2 from this topic and 1 from this topic and 5 from this topic, really allowed me to have a survey set that is very specific to the nature of our work.
For sure. So you've gone in, you've done that, like you've got your scores of where everyone's at. Like from that point, you said that was 3 years ago now. So what's the journey looked like from doing that initially to now? Because I'm assuming it wasn't just like, cool, we've done our surveys, everyone's good now, and then just everyone was perfect, and everything's been fine since then.
One survey fixed it all. No, it's been a learning process, and kind of a surprising one, actually. But I've, like I said, I'm just thrilled with the results that we've had. It's been a steady incline for like our general satisfaction results, and I think that most of that comes from maybe two things. One, and this is probably the most important, is regular follow-up. And then the second is, let's see, I guess like, I was going to say focus, but that's the same as follow-up. So I guess follow-up is probably just the one.
It's 1 and 2. It's that important.
1 and
the first
2, exactly.
Yeah.
It's A and B. So like I said, like the data, the way that it's represented in your dashboard is really is set in a way that makes it easy to take that information to your team. So you can do it very just straight numbers. You can say to the team, "Hey, here's where we're at. Here's where we were last quarter or last year even. These numbers are going down. These numbers are going up. Let's talk through them." excuse me. And we do that as well. It also allows me to sort of dive into those issues a little bit more, either in one-on-ones or just like, if it's about, let's say, deployment, and we're seeing consistently low scores on that, I can go and check out like our deployment documentation and talk to our PMs and tech leads about the deployment processes for every application and say, okay, here's the best practice that we've established as a team, and those are not being followed on these projects, and that's leading to these negative scores. So it's really empowering as a manager to have that data and be like, hey, I know that you're unhappy with the state of our documentation, say, on the team. How can I improve that? Like, let's do this for 3 months and come back to it with the next survey and see if we've not necessarily fixed the problem, but made it better than it was the last time we asked you.
I think it's an interesting thing. Like, a lot of this will come down to what you're like, obviously as a manager. But do you feel people were like honest about their opinion on everything? Like either kind of straight away or kind of like more and more honest over time. Like, or did people kind of be a bit like, no, I'm happy, everything's good.
I feel like people were very honest,
Like too
which
honest.
is a double-edged sword as a manager. So get ready for that. If you start to implement a DX strategy, but no, people were very honest. I think where I just felt any sort of pushback was on how like bought in people were to this. People I think were more hesitant at first. They still participated, but they were less like excited about it. It just seemed like another survey. Like, oh, here's one more thing that I have to do this month.
Yeah.
That's changed considerably, and again, it's all comes back to follow up. Like I've made it a point to report back in some manner the results every month, and use those in one of our monthly all hands meetings to have a conversation about certain topics. That has encouraged people to participate more because they're actually seeing their responses get responded to, and that's been like that's like the number one way to kill a recurring survey is to not do anything with the results. Like nobody's going to participate if they don't think that their opinion is being heard or acted upon.
Yeah.
So we have, as leaders, our leadership team has like quarterly goals that we set every month. And I also have broader biannual goals that I set for our engineering team that will often include members of the team. And since I started using the DX scores as the basis for those goals, participation, or rather enthusiasm for participation, has really gone up. And that's evidenced by, so they, not only are you rating these areas, but there's also an opportunity for leaving a comment. And the first couple of surveys, people were just rating and leaving it. Now people will write a comment in almost every single survey response because they know that like it's being heard, and if it's a negative comment or even if it's a positive thing, it's going to be shared back with the team in some way and used to sort of reorient the ship.
Do you feel like people were more like open to giving feedback through this than they would have been like if you were just doing one-on-ones like you were before?
Yes, I think that there's a couple of things there. One, sometimes some people are hesitant to be honest with to their manager. Even as charming as one can be, people might not want to get really down and dirty with you. I think that too, the fact that they are generally the same questions over and over and we're tracking the same data points keeps has people thinking about those things over the course of the quarter. When you ask someone in a one-on-one, like, hey, what do you think of our documentation, internal or project wise? Like, that can be, they might have an opinion like that, and that'd be great. But if they need to take a step back and actually reflect on it, then that's not the right setting for that kind of response. And so most people would just be like, oh, it's fine, or they'll think of one thing that comes to mind. But having that question asked over and over and over makes people really like dive deep into the topic, and gives them the opportunity to reflect on it throughout the quarter, as they're experiencing it, and not just like in a one-off setting.
Was there anything that particularly surprised you about the feedback? Things that you thought were absolutely fine, and then you were like, "Oh shit, like we need to fix that."
I guess not necessarily the specific areas that got low scores. Like, I kind of had a feeling where people might be more uh, concerned about topics than other areas. But what did surprise me was the variation in scores over time. And I found that to be like both surprising and really fascinating and kind of funny, actually. Because what I noticed now doing this for 3 years has been that our scores sort of go like this. They're, a steady increase, but they kind of dip down and then go up and dip down and go up. And where that comes from is generally, so let's say we take the two lowest scores of any quarter, bring those to the team and be like, okay, we're going to work on these two areas this quarter. People will generally the next quarter rate those two areas higher, even if they're not necessarily have made significant improvements. Like, just the fact that the leadership team and me as their manager, and probably the people like the team members themselves, are focusing on those areas over the time. They generally perceive that as like improvement because we're trying to fix something, right? Like, we're actively working on it. Consequently, that means often that the areas that we don't focus on get a lower score the next quarter. And so it's a balance of, all right, switching up where we're putting our focus quarter over quarter so that we're not spending, 6 to 9 months on this one area and getting it up a much higher ranking, and sacrificing this other area and having people's view of, that area go way down. So you kind of have to like lift one up, understanding that another is going to go down a little, and then go back, lift that one up, have the other one go down a little bit more, and just sort of, over time, slowly build them all up equally.
Sure. And I guess like mistakes that you made through this sort of 3-year process. Like I guess
Oh,
there's
no.
a lot of there's a no cool
No,
end
plenty
of
of mistakes,
recording.
I'm sure. Yeah, and we're done. No, I would say that the biggest mistakes that I made were, trying to be too prescriptive with my solutions. Coming to the team being like, hey, you all, ranked this area as really low. Here's how we're going to solve it. That sometimes was fine, but it was also not, it didn't get a lot of buy-in. And the more I turned those low score areas into conversations to gain consensus towards a solution, the more buy-in and excitement I had, and consequently, the higher the scores in those areas, the next survey would be. So, yeah, I would say my biggest takeaway probably was, you can't. I mean, you can, but it's probably not the best idea to use developer experience like metrics as a way to enforce some sort of top-down process or tool change, because that might not be the root of the issue. You might have, this is another, going back to surprises, the way that people interpreted the questions can often change the results of their answers. So, for instance, like, not only like people's experience with excuse me, I'm like
You good?
coughing here. I've been talking all day. Um, so yeah, people like might have a different experience with a topic like deployment. Like I mentioned, one person's deployment experience on an application might be completely different from another person's on a different application, but also their understanding of what the question is asking might change, especially for things that are a little more like, you're, oh my god,
Please don't
yeah,
die. This would be
yeah,
terrible.
I'm just like I choke on air on a recording. No, so like there's certain questions that are a little more uh about the general experience of the team. For instance, like workflow, or not workflow, like focus time, like I said, or empowerment, like how much do you feel like you have a say over the roadmap of what you're working on. And those scores can be pretty consistent. They might not be. What's interesting about them is like once I started to get more written feedback that, oh, people are interpreting these questions differently. So that was a big surprise of like, and probably a mistake, was like assuming that the way that I understood the question that was being asked was how everyone else was going to. So I'd say that's another lesson learned, is like, if you're going to start sending out surveys asking about people's experience, you should have a conversation about the questions too, and confirm that everybody's on the same page as to what this is actually asking.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I guess it must be one of those things as well, not to ask questions around things that you can't or won't change as well. Because if you put out, like, for example, like how much say do you feel like you have on technical decisions or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, and they're like not very little, and they're like, yeah, cool, that's going to stay the same. Like probably probably don't want to be putting in there and
Yeah.
getting negative scores and then not changing anything.
Yeah.
Was there anything that you put in there that you got negative scores about that you were like, oh, there's actually not much I can do about that? Or were you quite selective about the questions that you put in to make sure that you could improve all of the areas if people needed you to?
That's a great question. I would say a little bit of both. We certainly only wanted to track things that had the potential for improvement. At the same time, I didn't want to sort of have this false sense of like high developer experience when that really wasn't the case, by simply asking questions that I knew were going to get high rankings. So I think the biggest challenge in that regard has been, we are a smaller team. I'm just one person working on a lot of the improvements often. So the time that I can dedicate to things that will make that impact can be longer than maybe the team wants it to be. So there are definitely areas. It's not that we're asking you your opinion on this, but we're not going to change anything about it. It's more, we're asking you your opinion on this, and the change that needs to take place in order to improve your opinion on it is going to happen at a later date. And that's probably where we get maybe like the lowest scores, is low scores accompanied with like, we've been talking about this forever and nothing's getting better. And that's often then that triggers like a conversation in a engineering meeting where we were like, okay, y'all are really pissed about this, or like you're continuing to be frustrated like this. Should I change my focus, or should we as a team change our focus and start working on this more and put this other thing that we've been working on pause? And sometimes we do, and that's great. And sometimes we come to the conclusion, sort of maybe begrudgingly, that no, we need to stay on the course and continue with the work that we're doing, and then this will come next. And it's just, it's kind of reminding people that like there's only so much time in the work week, and
Yeah.
like we don't have any magic wands to fix things overnight. So like patience is going to be required in order to see things through. It doesn't mean though that I'm like encouraging people to rank things higher at the moment, just because they know that we have a plan to improve it later. Like I do want an honest snapshot of the team's sentiment at the time that it's being asked, as long as they understand that, you know, all of these things are on the table for improvement. It's just a matter of what do we prioritize.
For sure. So I guess that would be a big thing for someone who went and implemented this to start with. If they had, say, 5, 6 areas which all needed improvement, it might not necessarily be the one that's come with the lowest score that you go to implement like straight away. It might be actually then going and speaking to them and being like, so these are the top 3 that have come
Right.
out, like from what we're looking at in terms of like ease of implementing, like this one we can do straight away, we can do that and that will have immediate results. These other 2 are quite big. Is there a preference amongst the team as to which you would like us to focus on, and having a more in-depth thing rather than being like, that's the lowest score, that's going to take 12 months to fix, so we'll
Exactly.
go and do that.
Yeah. It also, and that's a really good point to raise, because that reminds me, like, it also relates to the nature and the makeup of the team and how the team changes over time. So, for instance, we had a period where we were, you know, onboarding a bunch of newer developers, and so the scores for application setup were getting ranked lower. Being an agency working with a bunch of different types of clients, like, it can be difficult, especially for like newer developers, to have to, you know, consolidate or, you know, download and set up all of these different applications and then wrangle the inconsistencies and the incompatibilities with like versions of things and try to, and like different environment requirements. So that was tough for a while. But then once our team stabilized at a certain size and people weren't generally having to set up applications, those scores still kind of ranked low because people knew that it was hard to set up an app on their machine, but it's not a priority. So yeah, having those conversations is really important, because if you were to just go with like the lowest scores, I probably would be like, we need to fix app setup. But our team, you know, most of the people on our team haven't had to set up a new app locally for over a year. So that would be not something that's super important for them.
Have you had anyone join the team whilst you've had these kind of recurring questions go out, and then give either a significantly higher or significantly like lower like response than the majority of people?
Yeah, for sure. I think that everyone that joins, probably their very first response is going to be significantly higher, just across the board. Maybe with the
It's like you being like, I knew
exclusion
I
of
was doing a good job. It's just everyone that works here is just
I mean,
complaining.
everyone's so
Like,
Pollyanna when you join a new company. You want to be seen as like a positive person, and like also you probably have not experienced, or even if you have, it hasn't been a repetitive issue for you yet. Any of the things that might disrupt your workflow as a developer. So, people generally will be like, "Oh yeah, it's fine," and it takes maybe like 6 to 9 months to start to see their results get a little bit more average with the rest of the team, solely because like now they're experiencing all aspects of our developer workflow more consistently than when they first started.
must be quite funny to see like 9 months in, just be like, oh, hello, John. I see your real opinions of everything now.
Exactly.
Oh, great. Well, I really appreciate your time, Ben. Loads of really,
Of
really
course.
useful stuff in there. I guess any sort of like parting words of wisdom for someone, apart from obviously using DX, which this is not sponsored by,
Not sponsored by
um,
DX, but happy looking up.
yet.
In the,
But
in
yeah,
the,
apart from using that, because it seems like a great system, like anything else that you've kind of like learned on this journey or would do differently if you were to do it again?
yeah, for sure. Consistency is key. You got to have it on a regular schedule, and you can't miss anything. The follow up is probably up there with consistency as the most important thing. Like, bring the results back to the team and talk about them. Like I said, just don't assume that you know how people are interpreting the questions. So even before you start your journey into developer experience efforts, like talk about what the questions mean to people and how they interpret them. And then just be like, don't take it personally, I guess. Like that's probably one of the biggest challenges as well. As an engineering manager, you want your team to be very happy, and to see low scores about something that you thought you were doing well can kind of suck. So just take a deep breath and be like, all right, now here's actually an opportunity for me to improve something, and that can be exciting rather than like, deflating.
Amazing. Well, thanks, Ben. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.